I'd rather be conquered by God the Holy Spirit than to be at a place of saying, I'm here to conquer the world and to lead us into the promised land as a big shot leader.
Thank you for tuning into the Rescue Mission Podcast. Today I've got Blake, Matt, and our CEO, Pastor Donovan, with me. We're going to be discussing leadership. It's become public in the last few months that Pastor Donovan is retiring in the month of March. So we were discussing before he leaves, you want to get together, we want to pick his brain on leadership. We want to hear about what he has learned. Some things he's learned the right way, some things he's learned the hard way. But Pastor Donovan, first of all, I just wanted to say thanks again for coming back on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure to be here, Jay and Blake and Pastor Matt, the Reverend.
I want to interject. Haberman. March is just the initial date. It could go beyond that, Jay.
Yeah, but that was a good point of clarification. So thank you for saying that, Blake. So, Jay Evans, here's what I want to share with you. The board and I have an agreement, and I obviously serve at the pleasure of the board because I'm their only employee. You know, in a not-for-profit structure like this, I am their one employee, and then the rest of the staff are the people that serve under me in executing the strategic plan. So what we agreed to was that I would stay as long as the board needs me while they're doing a national search. And then they're asking me to consider doing a 30 to 60-day onboarding period with the new CEO. So he or she will have somebody who could help them in the transition as they are coming into the rescue mission. So it's been a great ride, 15 years. Yeah. That is exciting. So you are right on in reference to that.
You're just a teenager, Donovan. You should have stayed longer.
Thank you so much. My goodness. So I like the word retirement. So I'll be retiring from the rescue mission, but I'm actually seeking God, and I'm looking forward to the next assignment because I still believe there's a lot of life left in me, and so I'm ready to make a greater impact if that is God's will.
So like Peyton Manning, you left the Colts, went to the Broncos, but you went back to the Colts to retire.
Exactly. Or you could look at it as Michael Jordan, who went away and did something else. Baseball and came back. So who knows what God has in store. I am open to whatever it is. And my goal is also to still be in the Fort Wayne area. This is home, between grandkids and family and deep relationships. And at the end of the day, it's all about family, right?
Mm. And I hope whatever you do is better than Michael Jordan's baseball career.
I just want
to share that.
Yes.
So what was the rescue mission like 15 years ago? We were obviously in a much smaller building. It was a much smaller team. Just kind of describe to us what it was like at the rescue mission 15 years ago.
Well, let me say to you, the rescue mission has always been an exciting place to serve. They were doing significant work at 301 West Superior Street. That's the location where I started in 2008. I was on the board in 2006, but March 17th, St. Patrick's Day in 2008 was when I started as CEO. Keep in mind, in 2008, the economy tanked, and so our revenue was down 27%. I remember our board said, what are we going to do? We were really struggling, and I remember Labor Day that year, I sat in my office there at 301 West Superior Street and prayerfully asked the Lord, what do you want us to do? And the first thing I knew was that we were not going to cut loose any staff. We had 32 full-time, 32 staff, then about 17 full-time, 15 part-time. And life was exciting, but by God's grace, we survived, from a financial standpoint. Our emergency shelter was just growing in leaps and bounds. People were still sleeping on mats in our chapel. We, outgrew our boardroom. And so we just had to do a lot of things. To go through the building, you had to walk around the building to get to one office because we ran out of space. So even in 2008, we were growing. God was blessing, and it was exciting to be a part of what I think God was getting ready to do.
Yeah. What was Donovan Coley as a leader like back then?
That was such a good question. In fact, I remember I came in as a pastor with guns blazing, and I didn't understand the complexity of nonprofit leadership. And in fact, I remember when our CFO back then, he came over to me and he said, Donovan, with all due respect, you know what this organization needs? And I'm going to say his name because I share the story a lot. His name was Larry Piano. He was an executive from Lincoln Financial and a great individual. And he called me to his office and said, what this organization needs is a CEO. And he just looked me in the eye. And I'm thinking, but I am the CEO. And he was basically saying, I just needed to step my game up. Because when you are a nonprofit, you can either function on the basis of being another organization with your hand out, with just going through the motions, but not being guided by good leadership principles and practices. So there wasn't the kind of practice that he was used to. And also, if we're going to take the rescue mission to the next level, it's going to take a different kind of leader. And so I can say to you, Jay, Blake, and Matt, I felt overwhelmed in 2008. I looked at where we were, financially, and I looked at what we were attempting to do, and there wasn't a clear strategic direction. I mean, we were accomplishing a lot of good things by the grace of God. But in 2008 and 2009, it dawned on me that we needed to change the way we deliver the services at the rescue mission. And so, unfortunately, we had to say goodbye to quite a few people. And so we went through some significant changes in leadership in reference to the rest of the team, brought in some consultants, and we started to rewrite the script that is now the rescue mission. And so it started with leadership. I remember bringing on a consultant, and this consultant, after he did a discovery, and then he did an assessment, he looked at me and he said, the problem isn't with anybody else. The problem is you. Are you willing to lead to a greater level? And I'm sitting there as he's sharing this with me. But then he said, there's one thing that you have going for you. You have capacity. And so the capacity to lead was what God, the Holy Spirit, took. God took my willingness to be able to change and to invite other men and women around me that had even greater capacity. And slowly I started to grow in my competence. So it started with capacity. And that's what I got. I just brought capacity here with lack of skills, lack of ability, but with humility. And with a lot of people pouring into me, I was able to guide the rescue mission to a place where we were now developing some stability. We're putting in a strategy and structure and systems and the right staff. And so I focused on those 4 things, and we started to emerge as a leading nonprofit in our community.
I'd like to touch on that a little bit. You said that you had to let a lot of people go. And I think when you and I have talked about this previously, it was something like in a year, it was like 80% of the total staff. And I think all the time we hear leadership talks about having the right people on the bus, but they never talk about getting the wrong people off the bus. It's always make sure you have the right people on the bus. They never want to talk about the other side. How hard was that decision? Because I'm assuming it wasn't just all new people. There were other people, even seasoned people, that you had to really make a hard look at and say, this is the direction we're going. Are you going to stay on board or do you want to get off?
It was one of the toughest decisions I've had to make. So the first 3 years, we said goodbye to 97% of our staff. And so coming to work was risk management. And we were looking at the final product. Now, keep in mind, the thing that drove me, the thing that I was passionate about was the individual coming in to the rescue mission. It was all about the broken lives. And, medical doctors take what is called the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And so it was critical for us to create a safe space, a psychologically safe space at the rescue mission to make sure that the most broken and most vulnerable would find a seat at the table. And if we didn't have the right people to be able to guide them through that process, then something had to give. Either we were just going to warehouse the homeless like a lot of shelters throughout the country would do, and it just becomes another flop house. And so slowly we walk through a process of saying goodbye to some wonderful people who had great hearts, but didn't necessarily have what it took to lead the organization to where I believe God wanted us to take it. So that was a very, very tough spot. And it was within that context that my friend Larry Piano literally said to me, what this organization needs was a CEO. And by God's grace, I've tried to fulfill that role. And hopefully we move the needle a little bit.
What would you say to encourage another leader who might be in that exact moment of that decision-making process of, I'm going to have to, make the right call? How would you encourage them that that's the direction they should go?
I would say to that new leader, that emerging leader, even though I had to make that call, I didn't make that call alone. And so I was able to get some really good people around me. My board chair, for instance, who was a managing partner for a law firm, he would walk from his law firm every Monday morning, and he did that for a year. And his question to me was, do you still feel excited about leading this organization? And so he mentored me. So that was really, really important. I also became a part of Renaissance Executive Forum, which is a group of men and women who were leading incredible organizations in our community with best practices. So being able to hang out with those individuals. So I would tell that emerging leader, don't think that you have the capacity and ability to do it alone, but to find mentors, godly mentors, if you will, men and women who can speak into your life and at the same time will hold you accountable. And so those are some of the toughest meetings that I've ever had when I would meet with an organizational psychologist who was on our board, and he would say, hey, I want to buy you breakfast, at this particular restaurant on a Friday morning. And we just went right at it as he was just talking about my heart, about my leadership, about things that he heard. And so those were some growing pains, but those were the best moments of growth in my life. So I went after those persons, and sure enough, they went after me, and they wanted me to be the best version of Donovan that I could be.
How do you pick the right people to have around you? Because the flip side of that is you can have the wrong people around you, and it can really bring you down. What are some strategies and some tips for people that want to surround themselves with the right people?
That's a great question, Jay. How do you know it's the right person? So are you asking from the standpoint of the right mentors or the right people to bring on your team? So let me just throw that back at you.
Let's start with both. Let's start with, how do you make sure you have the right people on your team? Because you talked about earlier that you knew you wanted to get the rescue mission to the next level, but maybe some of these people weren't the ones that were going to come to the next level. So when it came to finding the people that are going to go with you to the next level, what did that look like?
I think it was really important for us to have the right philosophy. What was my philosophy of ministry? What was it that were the guiding principles in reference to what should the rescue mission be? Okay. So as Stephen Covey says in one of his books, he talks about start with the end in mind. Okay. And so it was really important for me to look at what the rescue mission would look like, say, 5 years or 10 years down the road. In fact, I had no problem even putting together a future org chart. And so I encourage leaders to put a future org chart. And when you look at that future org chart, you're actually seeing this is where I want to go, and this is the kind of structure that I would need to get me there. Then I go backwards and ask myself, based on this individual that is applying for this position, or somebody's referring to me, What have they done? What is their capacity level? Do they have the chops? Do they have the humility? Are they teachable? Are they faithful? Will they become available to fit within the culture of the rescue mission? And so, knowing where you want to go, you're better prepared to decide who do you want to take the journey with you. And if they're coming in with their own preoccupations and presuppositions and the things that they are saying, this is where I want to take it, but we know under my board, this is where we want to go, then that person might not be the person for us. And at the end of the day, developing just that emotional intelligence, it is so critical to be able to get a feel and don't second guess your instincts, your gut feeling. There's an emotional piece to being able to find who you want to work with and who you think will be in the trenches with you. Who do you think will take a bullet for you? And so all of those things are so important. And I'll tell you this, and pray. Before Jesus launched his ministry, and even after he was baptized, you see that he was shaping the team. And he saw some individuals who may not cut it, but at the end of the day, those individuals were still a part of God's plan. Even Judas Iscariot.
Yeah.
God still allowed him to be a part of the team, but it was a part of the plan and the purpose of God.
So in the midst of all that, as you're navigating through these changes, you're making this transition from pastor to CEO. You're bringing these mentors into your life. So before we talk about how you surround yourself with the right mentors, tell us about the importance of mentors.
At the end of the day, mentorship definitely says to me and says to you that I'm prepared to submit my leadership to others who would guide me to a place where they have been that I haven't been yet. And if I don't humble myself and allow others to speak into my life, I may be repeating the same thing for 20 years and not getting it right and haven't really grown as a leader. But can you imagine allowing somebody to walk with you? So mentorship, to me, it's similar to being a disciple, being a learner. And so you're allowing truth to be spoken into your life so that you can get a handle on reality. And when you get a handle on reality, you're then able to walk in stability. And so mentorship is critical. Even at my age, I'm in my very early 60s, and I can tell you this, I have mentors in my life.
Yeah.
There are still men and women who speak into my life. And I'm excited about that because I'm constantly learning, and you never really stop learning.
So how do you pick the right mentors?
And so in picking the right mentors, first of all, I want to find individuals who have gone where I want to go. Okay. And so, for instance, one of my mentors led most people know who this person is. I'm going to describe him, and he might even be listening and when this is released. But he has led with such humility one of the large health systems in our region. And one of the things that I love to do is to sit at his feet and just to hear his heart. First of all, his heart for God. And then he tells me about his heart for his team and how even though he has the position, he serves as a servant leader. So he's there to serve his people. And he has the title president and CEO, but this person functions as a mighty man of God with humility who currently is leading a prayer movement in the region and the city of Fort Wayne. Now, from being the president of a health system, it's now leading a prayer movement. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so those are the kind of people I look for. I want to say, have they been where I want to be? So I look for that first. Okay. Secondly, do they have the character that I want to emulate? And thirdly, what do their team members say about them? And so I get to talk to different people. Tell me about so-and-so. Tell me about so-and-so. And usually that's how I pick them.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question on top of that. So how do you get them to agree? I think as a young leader, that's always been a nervous point for me, even when I'm thinking of mentors that I'd want to have mentor me. It's how do I get them to decide, hey, I'm willing to spend the time for you, kid?
So the very thing that you just said is what not to do. I don't ask individuals to be my mentors. I build relationships with these individuals where it is going to be mutually beneficial. And so I'm going to serve with that person. So what I've done with the mentors that are in my life, I don't make it a formal kind of an agreement between me and them. What I do is I position myself at a place where their influence will impact my life. And then I will share with them, I'm so thankful for you. And then I may invite them and have a cup of coffee or lunch. And so it is within the context of friendship, so it's relationally driven, not because I wanted to be a process-driven, formalized, programmatic approach to mentorship. But the best mentorships, I mean, think of Jesus. How did Jesus, isn't it interesting? He mentored these individuals, and they spent time with him, he spent time with them, and so it was more relationally driven. So that's how I would do it.
Okay. So in the midst of all of this, I think it really is quite the accomplishment, the longevity of 15 years as pastor, CEO, president of the rescue mission. And it seems like as the years go on, we see more and more leaders, just to be blunt about it, fall from grace. So what are some tips for longevity? Because you also are a ministry. So being a ministry, being a leading nonprofit, what are some tips within those 15 years to just have that longevity?
So I'll tell you this. I've been in leadership a very long time. I know what it is to walk through places of brokenness, to walk through places of failure in my own life. And I know when I was taking on this role as the senior pastor and CEO for the Footman Rescue Mission, I've learned a lot in leadership. And so to maintain longevity, the first and most important thing is I'm accountable to my board, my board of trustees. My board of trustees also speak into my life, and they provide opportunities for me to do self-care. Very, very important. I was amazed that on my board are individuals who speak very openly to me, and they want to know, how are my relationships? How is my relationship with my wife? And so I would meet on a monthly basis with my board chair, and he can ask all the tough questions. Mm-hmm. And he has. It just so happened that he and I also worship in the same congregation.
Okay.
So we have this deep-rooted relationship where he can just ask anything he wants. And then it was really important for me to watch the way I hung around females and how I deal with members of the opposite sex. Mm-hmm. And one of my practice or my policy here, we have not made this a policy of the rescue mission, but I don't ride in a vehicle with female. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so that is just one of those things. I picked up on that from Billy Graham.
Yeah.
With a Modesto, I forgot what it's called, the Modesto Confession or something. And it is so important to make sure that we watch the very appearance of evil, shun the very appearance of evil. And that was really important for me to do, okay? Now, I don't mandate that with others, but knowing the way I'm wired and knowing where I've come from in my own leadership journey, it is really critical for me to really guard my heart and guard my life. My wife is a significant part of who I am, and so I date my wife every Friday. It is critical to date my wife. If I'm going to go on a long trip, my wife is going to go with me. And so very, very important to be able to do that. In terms of what I watch, I don't watch anything on television or in the big screen that my 7-year-old grandson or my 3-year-old granddaughter I would feel uncomfortable with them watching. And so I've imposed some of those guidelines on myself that I may look like an old fogey as the way people describe it, but I believe the integrity, maintaining my own integrity and also representing the rescue mission is more important than me functioning like your typical CEO who is out there to conquer the world.
Yeah.
I'd rather be conquered by God the Holy Spirit than to be at a place of saying, I'm here to conquer the world and to lead us into the promised land as a big shot leader. I want to be mastered by God. And so I'm going to put myself in that place. Am I perfect? Absolutely not. My wife will tell you that I'm not. But I do the best I can to go home with a clear conscience and to really allow my life to be watched by others who I trust.
On the note of longevity and just not being perfect, looking back on the 15 years, what are some things that maybe you've changed or that you wish you could have gone back to Donovan 15 years ago and said, don't go down that road?
Oh, my goodness, what a question. So going down memory lane, I tell you, when individuals were leaving the rescue mission and when we had to ask individuals to leave or people were resigning, I learned something from Ian Rowland, who was the president and CEO for Lincoln. And Ian said one of the toughest things that he had to do was when he did layoffs, or they had to do cuts. And he realized that he was responsible for hundreds and hundreds of families. And I believe I might have been so strong in trying to get the rescue mission from A to Z that there might have been some insensitivities. So there are individuals that I've had to ask for forgiveness, because when you walk through changes and you're dealing with your own insecurities, you make decisions on the basis of fear. And while you have the strategy and you have the leadership and you have the authority to give you the power to execute, those are real human beings with families and children. And by God's grace, we have been able to walk through a process and we see growth. But my heart is broken when I reflect upon the fact that there are individuals who might have been wounded. And they've been wounded through the process. And so I've asked God to forgive. Now, others, when I've processed that with them, they said, well, when you're in the moment, it is so hard to make those kind of decisions. And they're trying to be an encouragement to me. Mm-hmm. But as you reflect upon life and you look back, as you have asked me to just do, I wish I would have done it differently. Mm. So that would be one of the things that I wish I had done differently.
So Pastor Donovan, as we're tying this in a bow and landing the plane, we've talked today about the importance of mentors, the longevity of leadership, avoiding the pitfalls of leadership. And in a way, you have mentored us today through this podcast. What are some tips for someone that wants to begin growing as a leader today after hearing this?
So if somebody is starting out being a leader, I would ask the question of myself, what kind of leader do I want to be? How do I define the word leadership? Okay. John Maxwell uses a simple definition of leadership where he says leadership is influence.
Yeah.
What is so interesting is I started out with that definition of leadership. So I would ask the person to start by defining it. But then I would ask them to describe it. And then even to ask themselves, are there any biblical descriptions of a leader that's there? And we could look at Jesus as one, but think about Moses or Joshua. So I would read, say, Joshua chapter 1, where it starts up by saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, Joshua, you're it. And you see Joshua going through this process, and then there's a verse that says, don't let the law of the Lord depart from your mouth, but meditate on it day and night, because in doing so, God will give you success and prosperity. So it starts with a definition, starts with finding a description of who are some real godly leaders that you know, and then try to develop a pattern of saying, I'm going to develop a plan to be that kind of a person. My definition of leadership has changed significantly from leadership is influence. And so leadership for me is having the courage to execute a plan through people to the glory of God. So having the courage to execute a plan. And I went back to courage only because I see that over and over and over again in Scripture, be strong and of great courage. And even Harvard University came up with a study and said that one of the greatest asset of a leader is courage. And so I've embraced that as well, but having the courage to execute a plan through people. If that's going to be your approach to leadership, by defining it, describing it, and then developing a pattern by watching people and then stepping into a volunteer position, start small, okay? And then start volunteering and take on additional responsibility, grow in your capacity, ask individuals, hey, how am I doing? And invite people to speak into your life, not necessarily in a formal, relational, just within the context that you're serving. And then just be faithful. And then be available and be teachable. F-A-T, faithful, available, and teachable, fat.
Be fat.
Yes. And I think you will be on a better path towards leadership.
Well, Pastor Donovan, thank you for bringing us your insight on leadership, for going down memory road with us and looking back on that. I want to encourage the leaders and maybe us today before we close this podcast. And I'm gonna steal a page out of Fred Rogers' book, but take a couple seconds and think about that leader or leaders or those mentors that made a difference in your life, and simply thank God for them. Maybe as you reflect on these leaders and mentors, maybe they're still around today and having an impact on your life. I just want to encourage you to reach out to them and thank them for the impact that they've had on your life, because as we know and as we've heard in this episode, we can be better when we surround ourselves with the right people. So Pastor Donovan, thank you again for coming on the podcast today, sharing your leadership advice with us. Hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
My pleasure.